So tell us what some of the evidence that you found on the show that convinces you that you've seen some weird stuff.
Well, there was a gentleman who's a retired military defense officer, and he and his friends experiment with very high tech that they're in possession of, audiovisual recording, high technology that they have possession of in a patch of wilderness that they're trying to keep secret because they don't want to attract a bunch of gawkers to it. I think they're not trying to start the next Skinwalker Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found basically were what I essentially would call sonar interruptions in the landscape that suggested certain humanoid shapes or forms in this one area that they've been studying. And they showed us the evidence, we reviewed it, and although we can't determine what it was, the evidence itself is unpolluted and it does show something that doesn't show up visually, but was showing up in terms of the sonar and the high-tech emissions that they were using. And it's one of these cases that you go over it back and forth and you run through the checklist, and I have to call it unexplained.
That's interesting to me that you can, have these things that you can't explain. To me, that would be like one of the most challenging parts of doing the show is really tapping into these things that are unexplained and kind of trying to wrap your mind around that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the problem with our culture is, of course, everything gets divided into take it or leave it, take it or leave it.
Right.
It's absolutism on everything. And the fact is, I'm not really interested in the people who are super credulous, who want to believe every UFO story they hear. And I'm not interested really in the rejectionists who reject every story, because the point is getting ourselves to that stage of a question. Do we have a question? Do we have a theory? Do we have repeat evidence? I tend to favor the repeat evidence because I think that, look, we favor it everywhere else in life. Every time I'm popping a pill, whether it's over the counter or psychopharmacological, I'm dealing with evidence that in, some reasonable percentage of the people, this stops a headache. Okay, I'm willing to go with that. I just want to apply that same evidence to weird phenomena. And I'm not saying that a person should jump into the deep end of the pool, but I'm saying that this stuff is worth funding, it's worth researching, and it is really important that we don't demonize or make fun of people who step up with a report if they're reasonable people.
Right. That's what you have to do. I've always had that attitude on my show. It's like, I'm not going to make you feel stupid to come on my show and talk about whatever it is that you've discovered. What I mean? That's not the role, because then people don't want to come out and say anything. You want to give them an open forum and kind of a safe space to tell their stories.
Absolutely. It's funny. I'm reading a book by a friend of mine right now, and he talks about discovery of meteorites in the 1600s, 1700s. This is supposed to be the age of enlightenment. Most scientists at that time did not believe in the existence of meteorites. People would step up with these stories of meteorites, and scientists would say, you don't know what you're talking about. You're being superstitious. It's an old wives' tale. Then eventually, as evidence amassed and amassed, we realize, oh, there are meteorites striking Earth all the time. This is happening. Doesn't matter whether it's coming from, a farmer in central Maine. What this guy saw is absolutely real. But there was a tendency at that time to kind of piss downward on ordinary people, who stepped up with accounts. And we've passed through a cultural moment like that recently, and the public is just not having it anymore. That cultural moment has passed. So the rejectionists, they may hold sway on Wikipedia and academia and so forth, but sometimes I say, culturally they've won, but intellectually they've lost. This is an age of questioning, and anybody who steps to the table, pissing down on people who report experiences or bring forward evidence, who themselves may have technical training. We don't live in that age anymore. I mean, you can get away with it, but not on my show.
Well, and that's the thing too, like we discussed earlier with the government inquests, and there's more acceptance to the possibilities of life, in other galaxies and universes and planets, where, like you mentioned, 20, 30 years ago, it was still kind of like pissed down on, but now it's almost like, well, tell us more. What can you, what evidence is there, and where do you think it's going from here?
Well, I think it's really exciting. I mean, the uptick in reports and the uptick in the quality of evidence is something that's absolutely real. UFO studies may be the one area where most everybody in this country can agree we want to know what's going on. Everybody moans about how divided we are as a country, but you bring up UFOs, suddenly that division is gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody from every background, every state, they've got a story. They want to know what's going on. They want to talk about it. And I think that's really positive. It may be the one area in our national life right now where that's actually true. So let's nurture it. And I think the quality of the evidence is so strong, and the forums where the evidence is being reviewed are so public and so mass. I believe we're at a point where we may see real physical evidence in our generation that stands up across the board. As far as I'm concerned, Frank Kimmler, the geologist who I mentioned, his evidence, it's going to be debated, and it deserves to be debated, but it's real, it's solid, it's something we can all talk about, we can wrap our arms around. Did this guy find some piece of off-world metal? And if he did, where is it from? Is it right that it shows manufacturing marks? Is it right that it shows marks of having been blown apart in some combustion explosion? I think that's worthy of debate, and I think we're going to get better and better evidence, because events tend to follow consistency. And as soon as we start amassing evidence for something, it grows, just like any other science and just like any other cultural belief.
And does he still have those pieces of aluminum? Because a lot of times people will take it and it's gone.
Oh, no, he does. He does. And I've held it in my hand. In fact, I might post pictures online later today of holding it. I got to tell you, man, it was a thrill. It was one of the thrilling experiences of my life, holding this fragment.
That's cool. I mean, you could be holding something from another planet.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And look, I'm wearing something from another planet. You know, this is moldavite, this stone on my ring. Well, came from a meteorite in Eastern Europe. You know, I mean, you know, there is some connection in our natural sphere here.